So my name is Phalen Tynes-MacDonald, Deputy Editor of the Wire Report. Um, and today's discussion will center on cybersecurity and online safety. Um, as we just heard, today's discussions are all centered around expanding digital access, and as that access expands, so do the risks to online safety. Our panelists will bring unique perspectives from the policy, legal, and industry landscapes to explore how we can strengthen cybersecurity for all Canadians. We'll examine the biggest threats, particularly when it comes to vulnerable groups, how governments, businesses, and individuals are responding, and what practical steps Canadians can take to protect themselves. So we'll start with a brief introduction from each of our panelists. We'll start with Brent. Please tell us about yourself and what you do.
Hi, I enjoy long walks on the beach. Actually, I don't. My name is Brent Arnold. I'm a partner at Gowling WLG, which is global, but also here in Ottawa. I am a litigator by training. I mostly litigate tech disputes, but I'm also what we call a data breach coach or data breach counsel.
You want me to just jump in? Faud Khan, I'm actually a stand-in as Charles Noir is under the weather today, so you'll have to take me instead, unfortunately. I'm a CTO co-founder of a EdTech. We do stuff for small kids. We teach kids how to read and do math. But my long-term thing is cybersecurity. I've done lots of startups and things like that. But the biggest thing is I'm the international convener for Working Group 4 under Subcommittee 27. So we do all the cybersecurity standards. So if you ever heard of anything like 27001 or similar standards on security and privacy, we're the group that does it, and I'm the convener for one of those. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ulrike Bahr-Gedalia, and I'm the Senior Director for the Digital Economy, Technology and Innovation at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. That's what I presently do. I have 20 years prior to that in tech across the globe and across non-for-profits, academia, industry, private, public sector. Very broad experience, but also broad, coupled with in-depth across 6 different countries. In my current role, though, and that's why I'm here also today, I'm leading federal policy files on cybersecurity, AI, telecommunications, privacy and data protection. And most importantly, I inaugurated the Canadian Chamber's Cyber Right Now Council in 2021. It's well over 20 companies to bring attention to, first of all, the great cybersecurity companies and solutions we have in Canada, but also have a closer look at all the issues in the cybersecurity realm. So there are opportunities and challenges that we deal with daily, and we read about them daily, and not only daily, perhaps every hour in the news, far too much at times. So want to provide today this angle to the conversation covered by my global background. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, guys. So to start off, I think I'd like to begin a little bit big picture here. We'll just start first off. What do you guys see from your different industries as the biggest online threats facing Canadians today?
Well, the bad guys. But to expand on that, I mean, the threatscape, and Faud would be in a better position to sort of talk about this at a technical level. I think broadly what I would say is we're seeing the same kinds of attacks, the same kinds of threat actors that we had for a while, but more so and better. Among the problems we now have to worry about that we didn't even 5 years ago are AI as a force multiplier, because it makes it much easier to put together malicious code and deploy it. Makes crime more democratic, because you can get into cybercrime without the sort of background you used to have before. The AI will largely help you with it. What we are also seeing is now the beginning of a sort of a collapse in terms of the regulatory state, at least in the States, around all this. I suspect I'll end up getting into more of that. But that's a real problem for us, because these threats are global. They don't stop at a border. And we rely to extend I don't think many people are aware of outside the industry, on international cooperation to make all of this work. And we are the biggest player in that is the United States. And we're now moving into a phase where we're seeing the gutting of institutions that are responsible for that. We're seeing the loss of personnel who we work collaboratively with. So self-immolation of sort of the regulatory state that's working towards trying to protect us, I think, is now the biggest threat that I'm worried about.
Going down the line. I think for me, it's just disinformation, like at multiple different levels. I think this is not anything new, but I think how you were talking about how it's weaponized now, right? That's a term that we'll use a lot. And so how you've taken AI and you can quickly take multiple different frameworks, APIs, whatever, quickly just build an application and then release it into the wild. And people just want to click on things, right? Everyone just like click, click, click. It's a clickathon. And and then you get compromised. It's really it's happening everywhere. It's pervasive. And I think from that perspective, that's what scares practitioners like myself. And we don't have the guardrails up yet. Like we don't have the guardrails for AI. We don't have like even let's step back 40 years before my time even, but 40 years ago when programmers were, it was a job where you wore a suit and tie, first of all, not t-shirts and all the kind of stuff that goes on today, but it was a job, like you're a programmer and your code was clean and you took respect in what you're developing, where now you look at a browser, as I'm looking at this, that browser's got 150 million lines of code. And if you're an engineer, you're like, why the hell does it have 150 million lines of code? I don't need that, but yet it does. So, but if you take a 1% problem, okay, let's just a low number, 1% of bugs in 150 million lines of code, how many bugs are sitting in that, right? Just waiting to attack you and I. And if you look up WebKit API, you'll understand that. Not going to get into that, but it's those things that we've allowed to happen in the industry have subsequently allowed us to become the attack points. And so, I mean, that's where disinformation can happen because your systems can be monitored easily, right? And so public Wi-Fi becomes an attack point, like all of those kind of things of where you're using it and the things that you're emitting because you've got Bluetooth on, everyone. And the other thing maybe, I don't know if everyone knows this, but if you have Wi-Fi enabled and say it's connected to your home network, right? So my home network. I don't know if everyone knows that when you go to public place and Wi-Fi is turned on, it will try to connect to your home network, even though it's not there. So it broadcasts that. So if I'm out there listening, and I can easily, I can basically say, "Hey, I'm that network. Want to connect to your network?" And you could be at a hotel, and you're like, "Why am I connected to my home network?" But it's someone just faking it, and it's easy to do. And so this is what happens, right? So this is where disinformation can come in because now things can be injected in path to the information you're getting. We're seeing this already. Um, any Uber fans up there? Yeah. Their model now is based on your income, right? So they created a new AI model that basically allows them to say, okay, you live in this in a neighborhood, this is the income you reported to whoever. And so what it does is it says, what's your propensity to pay that? So it's not that $20 ride anymore, it's a $40 ride because it says, Miss Franken, you've got lots of money. So you know what, we're going to just boost that up because we're going to make some more profit. Those are the kind of things that are happening because of that information that's being collected on us. And that leads to disinformation and even things that we used against us. And so I think as a society, we don't know that these tactics are being used. The guardrails are there, right? So with these bills that, I mean, I'm on the fence to the bills, but what we need is guardrails, right? And so how information is being used, also, especially I think with the U.S. position, keep in mind that 5 U.S. companies basically directly and indirectly hold 90% of the data that's being produced by the entire Earth population right now. That's scary, right? That's what we need to talk about because that impacts every single person in this room, whether you think of yourself as a Canadian citizen, a business owner, or just an internet user, right? Like that's where this whole thing gets kind of unsettling. So I said too much. Thank you.
No, it's not too much. It's a lot of interesting information and very insightful. Sharing that. So I always say the more assets you have, the more concerns, the more access you have, the more troublesome the situation can be because now you have access, again, the online access that we often are not as careful about as you also very well explained as we should be. but I think one of the really big concerns when I connect with industry is that a lot of small businesses say, well, it can't happen to me and won't happen to me. Nobody's going to come after me. It's also quite a few non-for-profits I've spoken with, or just smaller organizations in general, because there is the perception that they don't have anything of value that could be compromised or could be of interest, and that's unfortunately not the case. So therefore, always be mindful as an individual, as a small business. It really doesn't matter. Everybody is exposed to it and everybody is vulnerable. And that brings us probably further down during the panel discussion also a little bit into the area of vulnerable groups. There is another area. We often look at the outside threat, but there are a lot of threats from within the organization, which means sometimes be careful with hiring decisions because you might actually invite a threat into your organization. Um, and so therefore, a lot of businesses have shared with me that they have started to apply far more serious screening and being incredibly selective and careful on whom they hire. So that is often, I think, perhaps not as often discussed because we often look at the threat from without, but not from within our own organizations.
On that last point, the example that brought this to my attention was companies discovering that they were hired remote workers who turned out to be working for North Korea because they're in North Korea. So don't do that.
Definitely don't do that. Yeah, on the note of vulnerable groups, I think I'd like to keep going with that there. Um, you know, when I hear about people who are vulnerable to cyber attacks, you know, I think of like you know, senior citizens more being more prone to falling victim to phishing attacks. Um, you know, younger people, people in rural communities. But you did mention small and medium businesses, and I'm thinking, you know, I don't know, I never really thought about that kind of perspective. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on smaller businesses being an example of a vulnerable community?
I have those. Why don't you go first?
Go ahead.
So one of the big issues here is when the attacks are opportunistic, meaning they're not targeting in particular a large company, they're just sort of putting something out there and seeing who falls for it. The small and medium businesses are the ones that don't have an army of cybersecurity professionals, don't have a lot of external third-party applications and people helping them. So they're vulnerable because they're just not that well protected. But they are just as susceptible to, let's say, a ransomware attack, because even a small business has enough money for it to be worth a few hours of a hacker's time. And even if they don't end up paying, or even if they can't pay, if let's say, sticking with the ransomware example, if they break that company's files and they don't have the ability to restore them back, they can put them out of business permanently. So they're vulnerable because they're not well protected. And I think there's also a huge gap in terms of sophistication, in terms of knowledge about the problem. And the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity is doing a really good job of putting tools and training and so forth out into the field for companies like that. But I don't think that I'm not sure that the messaging around that has gotten far enough. No resources are available.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, small to medium-sized businesses, it's in terms of the talent that they might not have in place, the technologies they might, it's really resources, sometimes even the funding in order to protect themselves. And there are a lot of thoughts about maybe there's a, I don't know, CTO for hire that you can share, so chief technology. So these models, because they're CFO for hires, CFOs as well, so that model could possibly be embraced. And there is also the vulnerability. If we think about the outcome, not only downtime and loss of money, it's also your loss of reputation. And if you think Canada is a small to medium-sized economy, we have well over 98%. It's the backbone of our economy, small to medium-sized businesses. So there's a lot of, you know, an ocean of opportunities, probably when you think about Canada, for any hackers or any bad actors out there in order to attack our businesses. Sometimes also through my engagement with small to medium-sized businesses, they're not as aware or as informed. So I do believe repetition is key. constantly awareness and education on good cyber hygiene. It's going throughout the entire organization. It doesn't matter whether you work in finance or in marketing or in sales. And it's not the responsibility of the IT department, it's everybody's responsibility. So I think this training and education has to be done regularly, repeatedly, as there are also more sophistications in terms of the threats. Some are new, so we are not familiar with them, and we need to ensure the workforce is constantly engaged. The C-level as well, leadership, and very importantly, the board. The board of any organization needs to also make cybersecurity a key priority.
All of which is made worse by the fact that we have an enormous talent gap in cybersecurity, because you're absolutely right. IT and cybersecurity are different disciplines. Not enough companies understand that. Too many companies are expecting their IT departments to be in charge of cybersecurity, and that's not what they're trained for. They don't have the resources for it. And it's hard to get people to do those jobs here because we just don't have enough talent. It's a global shortage.
And the other thing too is just building on that is security and privacy are two different disciplines. Everyone lumps them together, but they're actually completely separate approaches to data and how you secure them, right? And so that's key. The other thing too, just as for businesses, I find we have a problem in this country where, and I've been since I had my first job was executives never seen the value of security in their organization, right? And wanting to work towards a culture of security. And that's what we need to do that. I'm going to say this, and I'm probably going to like really ruffle some feathers, but in China they do, right? Like everyone in China, like at an executive level, is talking about cybersecurity. And they have to approach their company and even running their different cities and stuff by a cybersecurity model. We don't do that here. None of our mayors have that kind of training. None of our incoming politicians, whatever, have security training to understand how they're being targeted. So different, like we have to shift our mindset in this country to just say, we are under attack. And I know we're Canadian, we're peace loving unless we're playing hockey and you make us mad and then we want to put our elbow in your face. But I think what we need to do is understand that there's a constant threat. We don't need to panic, but we need to know how to protect ourselves, right? And we can do that quietly, and we can do it just knowing that we're protecting ourselves and our Canadian assets by doing that, right? And so I think those are the elements that I think that we need to focus on, especially small medium business, because small medium business, the big thing they're after, credit cards. So if you process credit cards, they're coming after you. And I see so many sites that are being compromised right now. And what are they being compromised for? The credit cards. And they just don't, they think, oh, the credit card company's got this. The credit card company does not have it. And it's to their benefit they get stolen. So it's the same thing like our cars. Like our cars have really crappy entry systems. Why? Cars get stolen, they make more money, right? Like why? Instead of coming after the consumers like they're doing, they should be going after the car companies and say, okay, create a system that doesn't allow for what's called a replay attack. Like those are the kind of things that we should be targeting or not, right?
Just for the sake of clarity, the Canadian Internet Society is not endorsing launching cyber attacks on car companies. So thinking that that's advice.
But I'm getting a free rifle today.
Can I make one last comment? Because you asked about vulnerable communities and you mentioned youth as well, and of course seniors, and you focus a lot on the small to medium-sized businesses. But I encourage everybody, and it is in particular as youth is online or at a much earlier age, cybersecurity education has to start as early as your home and then going through schools. But anything we share on social media, let's also be mindful of, let's not share as much in terms of personal information and data and so forth. And people often freely do this. And seniors, it's also really to ensure we are various digital access for all inclusive, to ensure as families we take care of our elderly or communities, and that there are perhaps training opportunities or within libraries, their own communities, possible for seniors to understand what cybersecurity risks they can be exposed to. I just mentioned in one of my previous roles, I helped seniors and communities to get offline. It was the days of the internet when we were all very excited, and there was a lot of digital literacy training. We should do the same for cybersecurity and the same also for AI, as it must say, right? So this digital literacy training has to continue, and I sometimes don't see it as much anymore.
Thanks. And yeah, I'd like to move on now to a bit more about some of the policy approaches that we're seeing. I'm sure through all day we've been hearing about different kinds of policy approaches. But I do kind of want to touch on, um, I guess moving beyond what we almost saw, let's be real, like, C26 and C27, approaches to cybersecurity and privacy that are now, you know, lost to the wind, I guess. Yeah, what other things can we expect on the policy front in Canada as we go forward?
Well, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. And it's a shame because C26 was a pretty good law, but it's a starting point. It's barely a starting point. It dealt only with critical infrastructure. So that's table stakes to start the discussion. And I think it's worth pointing out that Professor Geist did a very good job at saving me a lot of time, setting the table in terms of all of the laws that we lost. Uh, to partisan politics and what's happening in the South. But it's worth remembering that C26 languished in the parliamentary procedure for years. So the typo that stopped it from getting passed was the last straw. But it was the last thing to go wrong after periods of inactivity. And it's because it wasn't made a priority. They tabled the bill and then spent the next 2 years reacting to whatever else was happening in the headlines. And it's really hard to get people focused on something that you say is urgent when you can't be bothered to push it through, to show it's urgent by showing leadership and getting it passed quickly. We've just rolled out a national strategy on cybersecurity, which again, good. It's been a long time since we saw one of those. But if you drill down and read what it's talking about more public and private partnership and working together, more education. Um, Good, sure, but I didn't see any new ideas. It sounded to me very much like what you would say if somebody asked you what your plan is and you haven't really thought of anything new. These are things we were doing and things we should be doing more. But the big detail that sticks out for me is 37 and change billion dollars over 6 years. Now, to put that in perspective, Microsoft's recent report on the cost of data breaches says that the cost of an average data breach, when you convert it to Canadian dollars, $7 million. So one breach, one company, $7 million. The whole country, a national cybersecurity strategy, $37 million over 6 years. So that's not even annually. That's not nearly enough to be putting into this. And this is a problem that requires serious financial commitment and a serious commitment of resources and real leadership. And I don't think that we've seen that. And we don't know who's going to be in charge. So I have no idea if we're going to see it in the future either. I said, by the way, in the planning call, that I would be the one to pick the fights, by the way. So that's what I'm doing right now. But the other thing to keep a good eye on is this. We really do rely on other countries working with us collaboratively. I mean, just to put this, not even at the policy level, but at the nuts and bolts fighting crime level. When we're dealing with a breach, I always hope when I do, when it's going to be international, because if it's international, there's a good chance that I'll be able to get the FBI involved if Americans are affected. If the FBI is involved, I may also be able to get Interpol involved if Europeans are involved. If they've got the real resources, because those countries have put real resources into those. I was talking to somebody yesterday who works with the FBI agents in national security, and she's being told those people don't know if they're going to have a job in the next few weeks. So, like these institutions, even just policing that we rely on outside of our own country, we can't. We're discovering now we can't trust that they're going to be there, and we can't do this alone. We're just not a big enough country.
Yeah, I think the only thing 26 is good. I think the scope was narrow. And so if I look at just like us as a country, what I would have liked to seen is healthcare called out. I would have liked to seen agriculture, which is huge for our economy, called out, and education called out at a minimum. I because those are areas that we're seeing a lot of hardship right now, especially on the ransomware side. And a lot of farmers are going to smart technology, and they're already getting compromised in ransomware. So the milk producers are getting hit. Like they're using robots, and if you don't, agriculture basically having a problem with labor. So a way to fix that is by using robots, right, to help with some of these more menial tasks where they can automate it. And so robots, and again, Canadian companies are creating this technology, which is awesome, right? We've got automated milking and all kinds of tools, but again, they're being targeted. And so we were like, I got a chance to basically try to hack a control system for a farm, and it was easy peasy because the controller had no firewall. It was connected onto the internet, and once I could basically figure out what the IP address was for that community by the provider, I scanned it, realized who the farmer was, and I basically could get into his controller and take over his farm system. Um, that was scary. Um, so I think we need to understand the critical areas of our economy that can and will be attacked and how we protect those. So that's what I would have liked to have seen in that policy.
Is there a trade-off between accessibility and security?
God, no. No. So from my perspective is bake it in, right? Like I have an ed tech startup that I started 7 years ago. And when we started that company, when my co-founder came to me, he's an educated, like he's the ed architect, that's our joke, and in our ed tech. So when we started that, I said, listen, if we want to do this, we're gonna do it right. We're gonna, build it secure by design. We're gonna build it privacy by design. Because if small kids and their parents are going to trust us with their data, I don't want that leaving on my clock. So I that's why we did that. And by doing that, we didn't do the typical thing where companies are 7 or 8 years in and all of a sudden have a customer that goes, well, what do you do for security and privacy? And then it's a bolt on. Once you have to bolt stuff onto a technology, then you open yourself to all kinds of attack surface. So I didn't want to do that just because I've been in the industry for so long. So I said, I'm going to get rid of it day one, right? And manage it as we build. And obviously, as technology is growing and we're adding new features, yeah, we just manage the risk when we create a new feature. It's much easier to manage at that point. So our overall cost to develop is much lower. Companies just don't design like that, right? Even military systems, unless they have to, right?
I had 2 points on that, if you don't mind, I'll be quiet. But the first one is the cost of prevention is always less than the cost of remediation. The prevention is cheaper than the cure, just like we were all told by our grandparents as kids. This is an area where that's absolutely true. You can prevent a lot of these attacks just by making sure your software is up to date. That's not even an additional cost. It's just a behavior that you need to work with. So a lot of these are procedural issues, they're education issues, because people need to understand that these basic simple measures go a long way towards making them safe. What you're talking about, and what I was thinking when you're talking about the farm tech issue, is it's exactly what we were talking about 5 years, 6 years ago with the Internet of Things. Yeah. You have all these devices for which there is no security being built into it. And this is one of the many problems in cyber where everyone freaks out about it. And then nothing gets solved because we move on to the next freak out. We didn't solve Internet of Things, we moved on to AI. That's what we're freaking about now. I don't think we'll fix AI, right? But this is what happens. New problems emerge, and then another problem emerges, and we seem not to have the focus to actually fix the problems.
We do have baselines for IoT, by the way. Yeah, both at the ISO level and NIST has also created something. So there's multiple different things. So again, like we can do that for AI or where technology comes. We just have to have the patience and just communicate, right? Like, and so we've done this at like an international level, which I think is so key that we create a baseline. At least we can build off those baselines, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great conversation. Just very stimulating and thought-provoking. I would like to add one sector. I think healthcare had, what was it actually? Yes, manufacturing.
Yes.
That is thinking about supply chains and how they can be disrupted, which is really critical. But now thinking about another policy item, or you mentioned also secure by default, demand, and by design. But we also as a group have spoken a lot about how to stop cybercrime if the RCMP is really overwhelmed. The RCMP, especially their NC3 unit, needs more resources. We had a great meeting with them and conversations about they get so many calls. I don't know, it was 400,000. They can maybe deal with 30,000, but this is another area that we need to improve upon and just give more resources where it's needed and make these policy decisions, because that's actually a very smart to do. And yeah, that's what I think right now the focus. I mean, all the areas were covered, so I echo everything you've said. Um, I also, you said something about education there, and I might come back to it later because there was another element which goes a little further than education, but I have to remember it maybe in the next few minutes. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just I'm interested in continuing with that on the private side. Um, yeah, what innovations, um, we touched on privacy by design, security by design, um, and yeah, I guess I'm curious what innovations are emerging um, among Canadian businesses to give Canadians better control um, over their data, over where it's going, and just yeah, kind of what are we seeing on the industry side, um, particularly since policy doesn't seem to be really going anywhere at the moment.
Well, you have to pull all the levers at once, but I'd love to hear what you think about that.
It's driven by the organization, right? Like, so again, it comes down to the corporate governance. As boring as it sounds, like security, everyone thinks it's this black art, that's all this magic, but it's really around risk management governance, right? It's totally old school. And people don't want to hear that, right? Like people are like, oh, I can just buy this new product and I'm secure. Well, I've seen more firewalls than I care to even remember. People bought this like high-end, like $1 million firewall, put it in, and it's got more holes than like Swiss cheese, right? Because the team doesn't know how to configure it, they don't know how to manage it and stuff. And it bought them no protection at all, right? And you see IPS and IDS, it was making so much noise, they just turned it off because they were like, it's going off, my pager's going off all night, you know? So it comes down to understanding what your risk is, whether you're that small, medium business and you're manufacturing. I'm sorry, yeah, manufacturing is huge. It's like embedded firmware. Like we talk about this because we get all this componentry made by China. Like I've got to point to the bad guys in the room, right? So like backdoor firmware is everywhere, right? We were just talking about this morning when we met about, this laptop here that's made by a Chinese company. So is there componentry that's compromised in it? Like this is,
My CISO's watching, so take this. Go ahead.
but I'll give you an example. So in the startup competition we were in years ago, we won, and I got what is it, the WorkPad, which is the sister to this. So um, I we won it. I didn't know what to do with it. I put it in our lab, and everything we wanted, or everything, every single bit and byte that comes in and out of our network. And so I plugged it into our wireless network in our lab. Totally forgot about this thing. All of a sudden, something happened and it triggered an alarm. It was an atomic packet, and it basically sent a ping to Beijing. Well, my team almost had a stroke. We didn't know what was because they didn't know I put this thing on the network, and they're like, "What is this thing?" I go, "I just won it. I just took it out of the box. I didn't do anything with it. And all I did was turn it on, connect it to that. That was it." But this thing called home to Beijing with a data packet, right? With information. So it actually, because we captured this, thank God, it actually used the GPS to say, here's where it is. We took the coordinates, the latitude and longitude, put it in, and it basically showed where our lab was. I was like, WTF.
So it's like
Like
catching
it's scared,
with
yeah,
where Drake's mansion is. Yeah.
yeah, like it scares you. It scares you when you see that. And I'm like we're prepared to deal with that, but Canadians aren't, businesses aren't. We talk about the small, medium business who now connects that. Is it when you're doing these sales transactions? Is it sending that somewhere? You don't know unless you're capturing and analyzing. And so, but for small medium business, we come back to the training and awareness. If your staff doesn't know how to do that, like how are you going to defend yourself, right?
Now, to be fair to your question, there are things that are coming out that are available to not like accessible, not just to large corporations, right?
Yes.
That the companies are getting better at. And this is where AI is also playing a role, right? So I've seen more cheap options for things like continuous monitoring, continuous pen testing, even.
Yes.
So some of these things that used to be very um, used to be very labor intensive in the sense that it needed a lot of humans and keyboards are requiring less of that. So they're getting cheaper. And there's things option available just to regular people, right? Like you get the virus protection on your computer, get a password manager, and so forth. But all of that all in the world doesn't sort of you can so easily shortcut it with just dumb behavior. I mean, I think for the moment about with let's see, we had a moral panic over the security issues with TikTok. So they said they were going to ban it in the States. And within seconds, millions, I guess, of people moved to a less secure Chinese app doing the same thing. So like people are like water, go wherever it can find a path to go, right? So you have to cure the behavior, I think. If you can't cure the behavior, all the tech in the world isn't going to solve it. I jumped in before you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, this aligns actually very well with what I'm going to say. You talk about behavior. So when we think about innovation or talk about it, we always think about technology or products. How about innovative leadership and innovative approaches? Because I think that's the foundation for even accepting anything innovative on the product scale, whether it's hardware, software, within our own organizations. And behavior, we need a cultural shift. We need a sense of urgency. And I had so many conversations, whether in these kinds of roundtables publicly or also just with industry behind closed doors, in terms of the shift in mindset. To see the sense of urgency, sometimes to be less risk averse, but to be also more aware. And to accept failure as something positive as well within the innovation phase or journey that any organization undergoes. But that again brings me back to leadership, because I think you mentioned you can have all the technologies in the world and products if leadership isn't open to embracing them, to using them properly, to training the workforce properly. I mentioned before, repetition is key. Good cyber hygiene, basically a good understanding what these technologies can do for you, whether it's enhance the workflow, optimize, maximize. This is when AI comes into the picture. But I do think innovation, we need to ensure it's not just attached to technology, it's really to people and their behavior and approach.
I think you need to deal with this at the community level. Because one thing that I was thinking as you were saying that, which I agree with 100%, is what more does it take to get people alive to this, right? Like, what more do you need? I mean, if anyone that follows the news, even if you just get your news from television, you must be aware of some of these the kinds of attacks we're seeing. I guess part of it is what you don't hear about is the attacks on small companies, the attacks on individuals. I'm part of an initiative that I hope is going to go forward, and I'm not going to give the organization's name yet because we're just putting a toe in the water, but we are looking at rolling out hubs throughout the country to provide volunteer support on the cybersecurity, mostly on the advice front. I don't mean like an army of people like keyboards, but people to sort of give advice to companies in smaller communities, in underserviced communities, like for instance First Nations, that sort of a thing, where that like the support that's out there and the information that's out there isn't reaching down to them. So they actually have somebody they can pick up the phone and call, hopefully in advance, but certainly when something's happened. So that's a grassroots initiative that it's the only one I'm aware of at the moment. But there may be others, but if I don't know about them, that means there's not enough. So I think you need to see more of that as well.
More initiatives of yeah, just organizations taking the lead on that.
But
Yeah,
building community, right? Like
Yeah.
I think it's about community. I I share lots of information, right? I'm writing a guide right now, early stage ethics. How do you kind of, get the mindset that you're talking about? How do you think about it from the executive perspective? How do you think of it from the engineering perspective or operations perspective? And so I think it's just building community that I don't think we do, again, because it's the Canadian in us, that we're humble and we need to build these online communities, I think, to just say, okay, if you need help, give me a shout, right? Because like when you do, like I've had to try to call the RCMP a few times to get help for attacks that were happening, and there was no help. So we had to figure it out. Fortunately, I've been able to work with people, stuff like that, so we can, and we have the connections like Sierra and stuff like I can call someone and get additional support, but that's not something a small business owner will have, right? They won't even know who to call when that compromise happens. And lots of times they pay the ransom, which we all know they shouldn't. And like that's the kind of guidance I think we need to get out there. But then even like just for everyone in the room, like you should just go. I go do this. There's a site called I Am Bond, right? So you can run all your email addresses through it. It'll basically tell you if any of your accounts are compromised, right? Just doing those simple things all the time. You just go, hey man, is someone coming after me? Right? Like just or you see something weird on your phone or your tablet or whatever, just run it and just say, hey, is one of my accounts possibly compromised? Like just doing those regular, I think, what did you call it, husbandry, or what was the term that you used? Sorry. Hygiene,
Yes.
sorry, hygiene.
Yeah.
Husbandry is a part of the
Sorry,
right.
sorry, sorry. I got that term in my head. Yeah, so like just those hygiene things that you do like all the time. Like I reboot my phone every day, right? Like it's just because I'm so suspicious. Because if your phone's compromised and you don't reboot it, it just resets all the security settings, right? So I just do it just because I feel safer. Um, like those things. I think it's just the awareness. I don't think it's complicated, and I don't think it's things that will worry you or whatever. But I think it's just like I just gotta do this every day, right? Or I gotta just check this once in a while. And those are just the awareness things. And I don't know who in Canada can do that potentially. I know Sierra does do lots of stuff, but maybe there's other kind of campaigns or a site or something they can do. But maybe that's a question for Sierra.
Can I have one quick comment? So from the Canadian Chamber's perspective, actually, because we have, I think it's about 450 chambers and boards of trades across the country. And so they would be in the communities. So I look forward actually to your program coming to life. It sounds great. And so the chamber has been also very active in the communities. And I mentioned previously also, libraries or places where you meet seniors, go to them so they don't have to go to you, right? Or not everybody can leave their home, people with different abilities. So we need to really be very inclusive here. But I just wanted to mention that the Canadian Chamber within Network are always right in the community, and that's great for what you're having there.
I've spoken to some of those local chamber commerce programs, and actually the Bar Association had the speaker series to get people like me into libraries to talk about this. And let me put this out to you because many of you are leaders here in your businesses or parts of the government you're in. This is something where when we talk about leadership, it's not the federal government by itself. I think this is anyone that has more knowledge than the people who need the help should be out there. So I would challenge all of you, if you have an opportunity to volunteer or to create an opportunity to volunteer to do this, please think about doing that. No contribution is too small in this area.
Yeah, on that note, like yeah, you kind of touched on this earlier about how people kind of feel overwhelmed, I guess, by cybersecurity advice. You were saying it's kind of like this magical thing that nobody really it feels comfortable kind of getting into. Um, Worried that it'll go over their heads and things like that. Yeah, and so volunteering, I think that's an interesting way to kind of make security habits easier and more accessible for everyone. Um, Moving on a little bit, um, I'm curious, what are your guys' thoughts on maybe some of the biggest mistakes that organizations make when implementing cybersecurity measures?
The one I see the most is the assumption, apart from thinking your IT group is your security force, the other one is assuming that there's a technological silver bullet. For all the reasons that Faud was mentioning, like all it takes is a small misconfiguration and a massive firewall is all it takes to let somebody through. Forgetting to revoke credentials for somebody that was working for you part-time or contracting for you years after they've left, things like this. But the biggest issue is thinking that there's a technological silver bullet that will make the problem go away, but really what is a state of mind to be ingrained in practice.
Yeah, just the only thing I want to say around that is governance, right? It's boring, but it speaks to I think everything that you just said because it would say the policies or once you do the risk assessment, you would say, here's what I'm open to risk. You would know that those will accounts need to get removed. For example, there'd be a policy and someone would be trained to go in and check those accounts. So it's just keeping it simple by doing governance and marketing companies just do a great job by telling us that security is a technology solution. And a lot of executives have bought into that. Oh, if I just buy this new shiny thing, it's going to fix all our problems, and it never does. And that's the problem, right? And we have to, again, it's shifting our mindset. It's like learning not to trust things and just kind of understanding what our risk profile is and what we're willing to accept. And that's how you really have to simplify. Then you build on that, right? So what are the additional things I need to learn about privacy or I need to learn about AI to protect my organization, whatever sector you're in, whatever phase you are in your company's growth, those are the things you have to do. Like you don't have to do what GE does. Don't model yourself after GE because you're not GE. mull yourself after whoever you are and say, what do I have as a potential risk now based on the data we collect and what we have to protect?
Yeah, I just draw the example as what we have been doing also within my own organization right now, which I find actually incredibly helpful. Well, in this case, well, I don't call it IT department, let's call it the service tech department, which is very small. But they've been sending a number one scams that are currently happening. So we are all aware, and it's really great because even though I work in the space, there are so many you're not aware of. So be aware of it's really interesting. But prior to that, which I really enjoyed, they sent actually phishing emails within the for them to test because we do take also cybersecurity training and we take it very seriously within our own organization. Who will fall for it? And I was thinking, oh boy, I need the cyber files. I never pay attention to all the emails or whatever is coming my way. But I really, if you can use your own or utilize your organization as a testing ground, and then perhaps have even a database or see how to improve upon it, and perhaps make it as an annual, I shouldn't maybe say performance review inclusion, but I mean, there should be a motivation for employees and leaders alike to take it seriously, repetitively on an ongoing basis. But I really enjoyed that testing because it was done incredibly well. So it's just an encouragement maybe to consider doing it.
That reminds me of an email a friend of mine got recently. He works in healthcare, and yeah, he thinks he's really good at catching those scam emails and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, one came into his inbox. He thought it was legit. He clicked it. Yeah, it's a surprise. You got caught. Now here's a mandatory training course that you have to take.
You know what, one thing on that point that maybe this will make people feel better if they've been caught out on those questions. Very often I find that the patient zero in an organization that's been compromised, the person who clicked on the email is a senior executive. It's a person who's very busy, is doing everything on a phone while they're thinking about 10 other things. Often they skip the training because they're too important for that kind of thing. But I mean, the biggest issue I think is they're in a hurry and they're not sitting down to and you really do need to do that, right? I mean, these kinds of threats, the phishing emails in particular, are designed around making you panic and act quickly without thinking first. So stepping back, taking a breath, and really thinking about it is a big part of that. But no one is immune from those, even people who really should know better.
And yeah, we've talked quite a bit about behaviors and the mention of yeah, I guess just like we're saying, good hygiene, good husbandry. And yeah, I'm curious, where do you guys see Canada's cybersecurity landscape evolving? We'll say over over the next couple of years, and where can Canadians find trusted resources today to improve their cybersecurity awareness?
My worry is we're going to be exactly where we are, but worse. I hope I'm wrong about that, which is why we do things like this. In terms of resources, the first one that I send individuals and small businesses to is still the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity's website. It's great. And it's got certification programs. So if you need to actually have an incentive to do some training, you get a gold star at the end of it. So that's available. And lots of other organizations as well are providing resources to look at. Uh, I think we should always be trying to sort of make sure we get those out there. But that's still my go-to for a lot of these things. And a lot of things get put in also by the FTC in the States. There's like some big public institutions outside of Canada are providing very good information that is just as applicable here as there. I mean, these are not jurisdiction-specific problems.
I know that the CSA group, who helps create like a lot of different standards and stuff like that in Canada, is working towards some business guides. One in like agriculture, because I see that, and also manufacturing. So they're working on sector-specific guides that build on some of the other stuff in the cyber center. Um, I think just as business leaders, I think we start to need to own this, right? I think if you look at the States, whenever something happens, the business leaders pull together and kind of just, what can we do to help this? And we don't see that necessarily. We always look to the big guys, or we look to the American companies. And we need to just stop doing that. We just need to say, we've got some really smart people in this country, right? And just like, let's get together and have those same conversations because we are a leader in AI, but we're not beating our chest. We are a leader in aviation, but we're not beating our chest. Like we are a leader in agriculture, all these other sectors, we're killing it. But you would never know because we're not that pounding chest kind of society, which is a good thing. I don't care. But like, I think what we still need to do though is for the communities, whether that's the senior levels or multiple different levels, have those conversations and not just say always deferring to the government. What's the government going to do? That's the out. We should be saying what's the in, right? Like, but again, it's a mind shift to just say that's how we should be in this country. I think that if we can do that, I think that's where our power play is in this country. That's our power play right now because we need to do that to say we're not American and we do not want to be the 51st state. And if we want to do that, we all better be prepared to fight for it at some level. And that's how we can do it by driving it in our communities. And then that raises our overall bar. That's just my personal perspective, but that's what I think we need to do.
Yeah, to add to this, so the Cyber Right Now Council, when I established it in 2021, was actually for the reason that we have so many amazing cybersecurity companies here in Canada, and to your point, nobody is really aware of them, knows them. I think that time, well, now it's a few years ago, it was about 340. We have by now probably many more. And also when they were interested in joining the council, a lot of them I had never heard of, so I had to read, and more are coming as well in the AI space. So where is cybersecurity going? I think our sector has immense potential. And actually, the tagline of the council was always leading the global cybersecurity future. That's a bold statement, but we can do it. And even being the most cyber secure country on this planet. So we always have these goals. And I like to see the future a little bit in a positive light. That these companies and we together as leaders and as a community keep on working um, to, to seek the opportunities while realizing the challenges. But while working together, undergoing a shift. And I always point out the sense of urgency, which we were able to do when COVID happened. We really were able to embrace digitalization. We went all online. We worked virtually and embraced all kinds of different platforms and methods to work. So I do like to see it positively because I do believe that with a positive attitude and that with an energy, we will be capable to just continue on a good path. Um, and whether it is also more collaboration with our allies, new allies, taking advantage of the many free trade agreements we have and to have a closer look at them and see how to tap into them a little more. So I I like to have a positive outlook, not because I'm a dreamer or I'm just an optimist who closes, my eyes. I just really think it's going to be positive. Canada is a great country, lots of resources, not only natural resources, but we have the talent, we have the companies, and we just need a little bit of oomph in terms of our attitude, right? And be just a little more assertive and say we can do this and have that leadership and attitude that other countries just simply or not just do. A lot of people, and I finish it off, said to me, Ulrike, how come Germany is known for engineering and all this? Yeah, because they talk about it, they toot their horn, so let's toot our horn a little. So there's more known abroad about Canada other than our cranberries or maple syrup, and also that we know as a society the amazing technologies and innovations that Canada has brought forward and is leading. And we often don't know this ourselves, right? So lots of good stuff.
All right. Yeah, just we'll wrap up here. Thank you very much, guys, for the discussion. This is really insightful.